David D. Levine. Did I say that right?
Yes.
Okay. He is the author of over 50 published science fiction and fantasy stories. His work has appeared in markets including Asimov's Analog, F and SF, and Realms of Fantasy, and has won or been nominated for awards including the Hugo, Nebula, Sturgeon, and Campbell. No problem. He lives in Portland, Oregon with his wife Kate Ewell, with whom he co-edits the Fanzine Bento? Fanzine. I knew it. Fanzine Bento. His webpage can be found at, right here, davidlevine.com. I'm going to go with that. David. Thank you.
That's actually davidlevine.com. Davidlevine.com is an internet sex point. It is an internet sex point. Yeah, he was on there a lot earlier than I was. Which is why I always use my middle initial. So I'll be reading today from this book, Old Mars. The planet Mars has been of interest to storytellers for about as long as there's been people. And it all came, and all those wonderful stories of princesses and dragons on Mars came to a crashing halt in 1972 when Mariner landed on Mars and discovered it was basically just a dry, lifeless desert. So this book is a book of stories about Mars that are stories of a Mars that we know no longer exists. But Mars has always been more fun in imagination than it has been in reality. And so this is a book of stories by a variety of people, including myself, about the planet Mars. My story is called The Wreck of the Mars Adventure, and it is the story of the first Englishman on Mars in 1702. In our world, in 1702, Captain William Kidd, was hung as a pirate. In the universe in which this story takes place, he was pardoned by King William III, who instructed him to take his court scientist, a man named John Sexton, who is fictional, to take Sexton to Mars in order to prove Sexton's theories about interplanetary travel. And so the story, I'm going to start off when they've already taken off and they're sailing through the interplanetary atmosphere on their way to Mars. Kidd stood at the rope, which on any ordinary ship would be the taffrail, his stomach troubled. All his seafaring instincts told him his ship was completely becalmed. Floating beneath her balloons, she drifted along with the wind, so no breath of breeze freshened the deck. Sexton, with his instruments, assured Kidd they were making good progress, but still he worried. An unimaginable distance below, the whole great globe of the earth lay spread out to his sight, a shiny ball of glass swirled with blue and white, suspended in the blue of the sky. He could span the width of the world with two hands held out at arm's length, thumb to thumb and fingers spread. The drop was now so great that the view had passed from terrifying to interesting. Sexton stood nearby, peering upward through his telescope, and Kidd moved closer to him. "Dr. Sexton," he said, speaking low so that none of the other quarterdeck crew might hear, "I must confess myself uneasy. I've sailed through storms, battled pirates, faced death by hanging, but this is the first time in my whole career I've felt such a tremulous sensation in my gut. My head is light as well, and my feet unsteady, and furthermore the quartermaster has said he feels the same. Could this be some disease of the upper atmosphere?" Sexton snapped the telescope closed. "It is nothing more than the reduction of gravitational attraction." With all his learning, Sexton sometimes lapsed into Latin without realizing he had done so. "What is the treatment?" Kidd asked. "Bleeding? An emetic?" At that, Sexton laughed. "Fear not. It is no disease, but a natural consequence of our distance from the Earth. This phenomenon was predicted by Newton and confirmed by Halley on his first attempt to reach the moon. As we travel farther from the mother sphere, the attraction of her gravity, in layman's terms, her weight, will grow less and less. Already, we weigh only 3/4 what we would at home." He bounced on his toes, and Kidd noticed the man's wig bouncing gently atop his head. Kidd, too, bounced on his toes, and was astonished to find the small effort propelled him several inches into the air. "Before the day is out," Sexton continued, "we will pass out of the Earth's domain and into the interplanetary atmosphere. There we will exist in a state of free descent, and will feel ourselves to have no weight at all. point at which we will be able to retire the balloons and continue on to sails alone. No matter how many times Sexton had explained this phenomenon, Kid had never quite been able to comprehend it. But now, with his 13 stone pressing so lightly against his feet, he felt he was beginning to understand. Again, he hopped lightly into the air, feeling himself float giddily for a moment before his boots struck the deck. "I see," he said. While Kid had been bouncing, Sexton had resumed his telescopic observations. "Of course," he said, peering upward through the instrument, "we must first traverse the boundary between the planetary atmosphere, which rotates along with the Earth, and the interplanetary atmosphere, which orbits the Sun." He collapsed the telescope. "There may be a bit of turbulence." "You call this a bit of turbulence?" Kid shouted in Sexton's ear. The two men clung for their lives to the whipstaff that controlled the ship's great sail-like rudder. Not only did it require the full extent of the two men's strength to keep the ship on course through the air, but only by clinging to the staff could they be certain they would not be blown overboard to vanish immediately into the vastness of the air. Two of the crew had been lost before Kid had ordered the men to tie themselves to the masts. The ship tumbled dizzily through the air, lashed by torrential rains, tossed this way and that by capricious winds that blew with hurricane force, not just from north, south, east, and west, but also above and below. Even Kid, who'd survived a storm in the Strait of Bab el-Mandeb without the least sickness, had sent his supper overboard. "I had no idea," Sexton yelled back. "Neither Halley nor Dampier ever encountered the like." "Sheet home to gallants, damn ye!" Kid cried to his men. But all Kid's seacraft was of no avail. No matter how he set the sails, the ship only reeled and veered like a drunken madman. Kid had never in his life felt so disoriented. Storm clouds roiled in every direction. The compass spun crazily in its binnacle. Even the basic, eternal verities of up and down had been left behind. "How do we escape this chaos?" he asked Sexton. "Watch for a bit of blue sky and steer toward it." But steering the ship with Sexton's air rudder was easier in Sexton's theories than it proved in practice, achieving little more than a dizzying spin. And shipping sweeps in this gale would most likely either snap the oar in two or fling the oarsman overboard. An eternity passed. An eternity in a sailor's hell of unending, omnipresent wind and lightning before a patch of blue appeared ahead on the starboard side. But though Kid and Sexton jammed the rudder hard a larboard, and the men worked the sails with skill and alacrity, they achieved nothing but another wild tumble. "God damn this weather!" Kid cried. "Do not take the Lord's name in vain," Sexton responded, "but trust in him, and he will provide." And then he pointed. Another patch of clear blue air, no bigger than an outstretched hand, had opened off the starboard beam. And just at that moment, the wind happened to be blowing from the larboard side, pressing the ship toward it. An inspiration seized Kid. "Set the mainsail!" he called. "Brace sharp up on a larboard tack!" The boatswain, who had lashed himself to the mizzenmast, stared at Kid as though he doubted his captain's sanity. At the beginning of the storm, following long-standing naval custom, they had struck all the sails and the balloons, facing the storm with bare masts, rather than risking the sails being torn away. Since then, they'd set only the bare minimum of sail to control the ship. But now Kid was telling him to raise the largest sail and turn it so that it would catch as much wind as possible. "Smartly now!" Kid cried, reinforcing his command with a demand for rapid action. "Aye, sir," the boatswain replied. He and the maintop men unlashed themselves and crept cautiously, with at least one hand clutching the shrouds at all times up the mainmast. Only the diligence, skill, and bravery of their decades of experience made it possible for them to unfurl the sail and sheet it home, the yard running fore and aft so that the wind from the larboard side caught the sail full on. No sooner was the sail set than it snapped open, filling with rushing air. The frightening sound of tearing canvas could be heard even over the wind's roar. But the ship surged beneath Kid's feet, lurching directly sideways toward the patch of blue. At sea, this sort of maneuver would be impossible, but with nothing but air beneath the keel, the game had entirely changed. "Set all sails!" Kid cried. "Brace all sharp on a larboard tack! Smartly now!" This stratagem could only succeed if they managed to press on all sail while the favorable wind continued. The crew set to with a will, sheeting home one rain-lashed sail after another. With each new stretch of canvas, the ship rushed faster toward the open air. The force of the gale on the crowd of sails also tumbled the ship to one side, heeling her so hard over to starboard that her keel pointed directly into the wind. Kidd and Sexton clung hard to the whipstaff, but though the ship now lay entirely on her side, the earth's pull had grown so weak that no man fell overboard. The patch of blue, now above the mainmast, grew larger and larger, and then the ship rushed through it, tumbling up into the blue and clear air. The storm fell away behind, a horrific ball of lightning-whipped black cloud. "Thank God," Kidd cried, "for able seamen." This story is set in the same universe as a novel which I have recently submitted. And I hope to have some good news on that front soon. Thank you.